Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Book for Lunch. I'm going to get started. Give you a few announcements. It was early, but just so you get some words from me. Let's see. Maybe. Oh, there it is. Okay. There we go. So next we'll have Rich Hawkins come. We've got his book on City Full Hill. It's a poetry book that some of us helped him put together. We took all of his poetry, went through, he had about 5 boxes, but we went through about a box. And it's all about the plains, and it's beautiful poetry. We present that next month, and you'll enjoy it. And there's like 14 chapters in the book. We were printing help us together because we wanted to keep the rights to the book and poetry. It's gotten a little bit harder with publishers. They want to keep track of everything, but you had to run your life, and we didn't want that. So, alrighty. So next, and then in March we have Andy Burnham coming to speak on her newest book, and it's not this one; it's another one. But I don't have the image wasn't up yet, so I couldn't steal it from Amazon. But she comes next month. April, National Library Week will be the second week in April, and we'll get more information. Yeah. So I need you to save the date. Did you know that the Pioneer Memorial Library is going to be 100 years old? Wow. As an official public library? It became a public library March 14th, 1926. So on the 13th, we're working on a gala event, which will be we'll have tickets and some music and entertainment. And then Saturday we'll have some family fun for adults and children and families. You can be single. We'll just have a lot of fun things to do that day. And so more information will be coming on that. And then April 11th, we have our murder mystery, which is the Brent's murder mystery. That's the week, 3 days, so 4 days before that is National Library Week. So that'll be murder mystery coming up. You know, someone who needs to work on their English, doesn't matter whether they speak Spanish or not. They can speak Spanish, they can speak any language, and Vi is excellent at getting people to practice their English, learn their English. And so they have workbooks and things like that. It's every Thursday at 6:30. Their class starts January 22nd. Come on. Our story time and our play with purpose is coming up, and our youth activity center is open every afternoon. Our story time is no longer, you do not have to sign up for story time. So if you have someone visiting you, Chelsea's always would love to have your children on Tuesday or Wednesday or Tuesday night for story time, and their play with purpose, those take sign up, and that's February 5th through March 5th. So there you go. And then if you know someone who needs to have a place where they can have an interview or webinar, or say you guys just want to sit, talk and be quiet, and or you have to talk with your tax accountant or something like that, you can reserve one of these booths. You can call us up and ask us to reserve a hush office. If you're tech savvy, you can also go online and fill it out too. And there's no charge. And you just can't eat and drink in them. Okay, we want to keep them nice. And they were provided to us by the Friends of the Pioneer Memorial Library, helped to do a fundraiser for the 3 offices. And so, and then the Jane B. Hansen helped us with the biggest office. So those are a new addition from last year, but please come and use them. If you just want to read, or if you just want to study, or if you want to do a webinar, or whatever it is you want to do, just can't have food or drink, or you can sell product, but you can't show product. No oils, no Mary Kay, no Avon, stuff like that. Okay, so our newsletter. We have a newsletter that's come out, our quarterly newsletter. You can sign up for it online, or you can pick it up at the front desk. And then we have it's all available. Oops. If you, okay, come on. If you want to be entertained by Vi and Katie, every month they come out with a book on different genres and books, and it is quite fun. It's their podcast. It's videoed, and they'll tell you about different books that you might want to enjoy. So it's on our website. It's under, you look for Shelf Indulgence, you will find it. So it's quite nice. They enjoy doing it, and you will enjoy watching. All right, just remember, if it starts to snow or something, look on our website, look on our Facebook page, look on our catalog to say whether if we're open or not. It'll say closed, new weather, or closed. Okay? So now we have digital books on Hoopla. We have digital books on Sunflower e-library. If there's something that you would like to read and it's not on Sunflower, but there's a long line for holes. Would you put yourself on hold for it? We'll check it every once in a while, and maybe we can buy it. Okay. All right. So with no further ado, let me invite Dr. Ray Nolan to speak on the enduring Indians of Kansas. He has been teaching for many years here and studied and finished his PhD while he's been in Colby. I'll let him tell you the history, and yeah, let him get started. Thank you, Ray.
Okay, I struggled with a cold this week, so my voice is a little bit deeper than usual. I apologize. So my research area specifically is American Indian studies, modern. I try to do a lot with modern Native America, but recently I've gone back to the late 19th century and looking at, I'm looking at really how tribal peoples survived Kansas, the late 19th century. And one of the key books about that is from Professor Joseph Herring, who he wrote this, 1990, I think it was. But if you're interested in Kansas, 1990, if you're interested in the survival of the Kansas tribe, we still have 4 tribes here in Kansas at all, then this is like I have 3 up here. The first one actually that this builds on is from Craig Miner and William Unruh. It's called The End of Indian Kansas, A Study of Cultural Revolution, 1854 to 1871. Almost positive the library has this as well. So these are 2 professors from Wichita State, very famous if you know Kansas history. And so they talk about in this book what were known as Indian rings, which was how politicians and Indian agents and other people that had access to tribal land tried to convince the tribes to sell away their land. Okay. And so this is one of the great studies on the topic. And then Herring builds on that. And so Unruh and Miner basically, they show you the backhanded ways that people were convinced, that the tribes were convinced to say that, yes, we're going to allow you to have this land, but we'll go here, we'll go somewhere else. Okay. When you say that tribes signed away their land in Kansas, I present today a brief paper on this last year at the Kansas Association of Historians, which It's a very laid back history conference. But one of the professors there got irritated with me because I said that this tribe signed away their land instead of saying that this tribe's land was stolen. You know, I brought this up at the museum last time when I was there a few months ago. And so you can think of it that way, that the land in Kansas was stolen. Okay. So if you really want to know about this topic, about late 19th century tribes having their land in Kansas and then trying to exist after the fact, Minor and Unrow is a great place to start. And then you go to Herring to learn about their survival. Okay. And then if you want to know about Northwest Kansas in particular and the violence of Northwest Kansas, you also go to Craig Miner's West of Wichita, which is one of the most famous books ever written about the state of Kansas. Okay. And those three books themselves give you a really good feel for the Kansas tribes. Now, prior to Herring writing this book, when he was a graduate student at TCU, he wrote an article for the Western Historical Quarterly. I don't think the library has this, but you can find this online. You probably have to pay about $10. But those of you who are familiar with academia know that most professors, myself included, will publish in academic journals about 30 pages, and their usually articles can be fairly dense, but it's mostly primary research, and it's the best research that ends up in the Western Historical Quarterly. This issue is from 1986, but Herring built one of his chapters from this book on this article. This is the Indian intransiency in Kansas, government bureaucracy versus Mokahokos, Sacs, and Foxes. Okay. And so one of his chapters here on the enduring Indians in Kansas is based on the article here about Mokahoko. Okay. Mokahoko is really kind of the start of this book too in some ways. He was a traditionalist of the Sacs and Foxes, and he did not want to leave Kansas. And so he got very mad at his fellow Sacs and Foxes for being willing to go. Okay. And they eventually did sign or have their land stolen from them. He tried to stop this from happening. But ultimately he passed away, and many of his tribesmen moved to Oklahoma as they were kind of forced to do. But he still stands up as this guy that really stood up for the old ways of doing things. But he was very, very savvy, which goes to the heart of this book here, is that Herring shows how these tribes were willing to acculturate, but not assimilate. So in the 1870s, as the tribes had signed away much of their land and were ready to move to Oklahoma, some members of these tribes thought that their only way of survival was to assimilate into white American culture. And really, a lot of people in the East picked up on that. Eventually, one of the most powerful pieces of legislation in Indian history, the Dawes Act, was signed in 1887. The Dawes Act is all about assimilation. Well, prior to the Dawes Act, members of the Kansas government and missionaries and some members within the tribe trying to get the tribes to assimilate as well. And it wasn't because they didn't appreciate the tribes. The assimilation factor was all about survival. And once the treaty making of the American government was done in 1870, really the only thing left to do was to get forced to reservations And you could be off reservations, but you had to assimilate into American culture. Otherwise, you weren't going to survive. That was what many people thought. And Mokohoko was different. He believed in acculturation. So Herring's book is all about these two things working alongside each other. And so acculturation often took the form of simply cooperating with the white culture around you and saying, yeah, I'll go to that church. I will worship how you want me to worship, but not truly buying into it, and then also worshiping how you want to worship. So the idea of acculturation is also about survival, but you keep a lot of your own traditions, and you keep a lot of the way of life that you lead. So you still go and hunt buffalo, even though the buffalo were slowly diminishing, well, quickly by the 1870s. Even though you might still hunt deer, even though you might, still raise, crops the way you wish, you still are going to do some things to cooperate with society. So this acculturation factor was really, really important because as all the tribes in Kansas were moving into Oklahoma, based on getting tricked into or agreeing to, oftentimes it was one member of a tribe, a guy named Moses Keokuk of the Saxon Foxes, was all about the science way to land so he could become wealthy, And so often there was even tribal members that would sign away the land. But, other people would try to survive while I try to grab a coffee. All about survival. Acculturation with my cold. Not keeping into my cold, simply existing alongside it. There you go. But, Mogogo is trying to figure out a better way. Okay, so he wants to stay. So, tribal members would find odd jobs for white farmers. They would find small swaths of land to farm, in between white farmer land. They would still hunt for their food. They would find a variety of small ways to survive. And the actual farmers, and this is all in eastern Kansas, the Saxon Foxes were heavily around Mardison River and that area, kind of, south of Manhattan, south of Topeka, that type of area. It was heavily where they existed. And they would simply exist in the cracks of society. But that's how they wanted to be. They didn't want to go through. So his book is, if you want to understand some of these pressures that are on them, then it's a great book to look at. Yeah. Now, what I presented on last year at a conference was, I was really interested, and I'm still really interested in some of the intricacies. I would like to do some research on some of these specific ways that individual people survive. That's going to take a lot more research on my end. I've exhausted all the fairly easy resources, the online primary sources and that kind of stuff. And so now, in order for me to finish this, I'm going to have to go to some national archives and the Topeka and the Kansas archives and really see if I can build on this. It was written in 1990. He's retired now. As a historian, it's always a good thing to maybe revisit, a topic after so much time. So I'm going to try to revisit this more heavily. One of the things I found that was the most fascinating to me that I really want to build on is that many of these indigenous people, what do you think the water's gonna help? Thank you, Eddie.
Your idea.
Like, many of the tribal peoples fought in civil war, and fought for the Union. Many of Oklahoma fought for the Confederacy, but they, the ones that came back as veterans were pretty savvy about wearing the uniform and making sure that people in their area knew that they were veterans. And so this is something that's not in the book necessarily, but something that I found with my own research. And I would like to build more on that myself. Because, all of a sudden there, you have a shared past, very violent shared past, and that builds a lot of respect. And so, many of the indigenous people that stayed had that experience as well as some of them, many of some. Now, ultimately, we still have 4 tribes in Kansas. We have the Prairie Band, Potawatomi, the Saxon Foxes, the Missouri Saxon Foxes, that is. The Kickapoos and the Iowas. And when I first encountered this book was actually when I was doing my master's program at Fort Hayes, and I was looking at ways that all those tribes had cooperated in the past. And so it actually, of course, became useful to me because of the cooperation factor. And I was trying to see where tribes had cooperated previously. And while there wasn't necessarily tons of cooperation, there was some working together. So the Munsees and the Chippewas, for instance, had fully assimilated into white society as a way of survival and existing. And the Saxon Foxes would actually work with them. And so you had tribal people that cooperated that way. What I was looking at back then in graduate school, very early on, was the fact that we were supposed to get a casino by the Kansas Speedway back in 2004. You might remember that. And that it was going to be sponsored by the tribes in cooperation. And it didn't work out because Kansas had legalized gambling. It made no sense to have an Indian casino anymore. So that they wouldn't get the same type of profits. So I was inspired by that cooperation. Look at cooperation. So anyway, that's when I first encountered this book. Now let me backtrack here. I kind of started right out of the book, and I should have backtracked or should have started a little bit earlier. One of the key things, if you're really interested in indigenous studies, one of the key elements of indigenous studies is the concept of sovereignty. But when you talk about it in terms of Native people, you really look at it in terms of what's called self-determination. Okay? Sovereignty is often phrased with European societies, European states. You talk about a country being sovereign, things like that. And tribal peoples have self-determination. Self-determination, meaning that you have the right to do as you wish. You create your own life for yourself. And so one of the key arguments for indigenous history historians, people who learn history work with for indigenous rights, all that kind of stuff is, recognizing and protecting their sovereignty and their right to self-determination. Okay? And so really all of these books in some way are looking at that. How has one society infringed on the self-determination of another society? And what does that look like once they, Now, the second that European cultures came to North America, you essentially have a removal process started. Okay. So you have a removal process all the way back to the 1630 Pequot War in New England, that what will become New England, where European peoples need to survive. They are looking at more land. Where are they going to get that land? Well, they're going to infringe on the rights of indigenous peoples there, and you're going to have war. Okay? And so you have that early on, and how do you deal with that? Well, once the United States expands, okay, with the Louisiana Purchase, now all of a sudden you're dealing with so many more indigenous people to deal with. So then the United States government, although it already used treaties, it really expands on the treaties. So 1809, we start with our treaty process. Okay, so William H. Clark is Lewis and Clark fame is really the first secretary for this. He's the first government official that's going to create these treaties. He goes in, and out of St. Louis, we get all these treaties with these different tribes, so we can have a peaceful removal of tribes. We move them from one place to another place. Usually the treaty involves getting new land, and the U.S. government is going to give you some type of provision, some type of money, something like this. So this goes on all the way until 1870, when we don't have any more land that we want to give. So you get a place like Kansas and Oklahoma were originally territory. But once enough people wanted Kansas, now it's only going to be Oklahoma. And so that's the key to the removal. You don't have a reason to make, well, you try to make treaties. This is all about the treaties. But at that point, 1871, you're cutting off the treaties, and now you are, if they're not cooperating, forcibly removing people. Okay? So when the Saxon Foxes, well, there's a few that stayed, but when most of them moved to Oklahoma, they're getting removed, put a gun to their back, they're getting forced out. It's really kind of the second big removal after the one for the 5 civilized nations of southeastern U.S. in Oklahoma. So, the battle over and the infringement on our self-determination, our right to exist as we want, is the key to all of this information. What can a person do or not do? What are they allowed to do? What should they be allowed to do? So that's at the heart of all of this, U.S. Law with American Indian. Now, in the modern era, so where does this go? You have 4 tribes that basically just exist in the cracks of Kansas. That's what I like to do more research on. Okay. But this goes into the 20th century, and it doesn't get a whole lot better for a while. Tribal people during the New Deal, John Collier, the Interior Secretary, is very much for letting tribal people have their lands back. We passed an Indian Reorganization Act. Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act that allows a lot of tribes to have the land back. That was really taken away from them with the Dawes Act. The Dawes Act really chopped up the reservations, tried to make indigenous people and the farmers. They sometimes succeeded, very often did not. Oftentimes went back to their old ways of communal living. Collier wanted that to change, but the tribes had to write constitutions that were very much in the form of U.S. government constitutions. And so the tribal people didn't really understand how to do that necessarily. Sometimes they were successful, sometimes they weren't. They had the choice whether they could do it or not. So the IRA really was mixed on its success But the US government is still very much into pushing US tribes into doing things how they want to do it. They forced the Navajo Nation to get rid of a lot of the sheep stock, things like that, that really didn't work out well. Then in the 1940s and in the 1950s, Congress wanted to remove financial backing from tribes. So he started the termination policy. That termination policy, well, which two tribes were terminated from a U.S. Backing status. A lot of tribes were scared by that. There was also a relocation program in the 60s and 70s where people from reservations would get moved to cities, and there was supposed to be jobs for them and help to find housing. Didn't really go very smoothly. It didn't work out well. And so by the time we get to the late 60s and early 70s, when we have this new protest culture popping up in the United States, you had a lot of urban Indians and rural Indians who are very much wanting to get back to acculturation, not necessarily assimilation. Okay? And you see the takeover of Alcatraz, you see the takeover of Pine Creek Reservation, Wounded Knee, 73. These types of things are the angry reactions, you know, to 100 years of trying to force assimilation. So then in 1975, Congress writes an Indian Self-Determination Act. And after 75 Act is out, we have seen a much better relationship between tribal nations and the US government, working alongside each other to try to create a relationship where you help each other, you don't force each other. You see this a lot, and a lot of my own work in the past has been with environmental studies and tribal nations and environmental studies. The stuff that I published in journals has been on this area on how do tribes deal with pollution, how do tribes deal with environmental degradation, these types of things. And many tribes, especially the Osages in Oklahoma, have very powerful environmental protection agencies that work alongside the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And they work together on following congressional laws. Okay, so the Clean Water Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, all of these things, tribal nations are generally in charge of following those themselves. There's like a state, you know, so a state and tribal nations essentially on the same level, and they work alongside the U.S. government. So that's a great example, though, of essentially, you know, in my opinion, acculturating to the situation. You're not willing to give up your self-determination. You're not willing to have someone infringe on it. You want to run your own programs, you know. And so I like to think that the stuff that, you know, Moka Hoko was telling his tribe to do was eventually figured out that, you know, by the U.S. government as well down the road. And I think it's getting better as we go on in time. So I don't know where we are on time. 12:40. Any questions about this? I took you to why the book's important, in my humble opinion, and then to just Indian studies in general, Native American studies in general, and some of the key elements like sovereignty and self-determination, assimilation and acculturation. So, yeah.
Dr. Nolan, do you have any idea what the percentage of population in Kansas were indigenous people when they first started this, and then what that percentage is now, roughly?
I don't remember what it was. I don't. That's a good question. I don't even know if the book say. I don't know if the book say that, but I don't know what it was. That's
Do you know roughly how many people moved to Oklahoma when they were encouraged to?
Not off the top of my head, I don't, but I think I know where it is. If I can look at it fast. Because in each one of his chapters, he talks about their, the people who are moving. If I can go to it real quick here. I went right to this section, I know I will go. I'll give it one more page here. Two more pages here. 3 more. Perfect. I'm not seeing it in that section.
That's okay. I was just curious.
Yeah,
Curious.
it might, actually, minor and underout as well, they might, my book is very old, I write my books, so. I wonder if I actually get to it. No. Almost caused what's in there, but I can't find it quick.
Thanks anyone.
But yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, I'm interested in the living culture that we have in Kansas now. Can you explain that a little bit about how they continue with their communal living cultures? If they're, sorry for my ignorance, are there any no restrictions?
There are reservations, but they're very small. And there's 4.
There are.
Yeah, there's 4, they're very small. I have not looked at recent things they're doing, yeah, I haven't looked at anything recently. As far as any of the finances of it or the events, no. But my last interest in the really modern was that failed try at a casino.
Oh.
And of course, the Prairie Fire Casino is still very popular in Topeka. That's run by the Prairie Band Potawatomi. But I don't know what other businesses they have on their reservations. With my dissertation work, I did a lot. I didn't do Kansas tribes with my own stuff that I published. I didn't do Kansas tribes. It's actually one of the reasons I'm trying to get more into back into Kansas the way I was doing my master's thesis. I want to learn more. I want to focus more on Kansas again because I stretched into Oklahoma heavily. Yeah, it's well, especially with environmental stuff. There wasn't, when I was dealing specifically with environmental stuff, there wasn't a lot in Kansas to deal with. And so I focused actually on Osages and Quapaws and these little logos in Santa Fe or in Albuquerque, South Alabama.
Well, from Conceal's point, I really brings the new exhibit in, but I'm really interested in presenting, them as a living culture.
Right.
And I because I think that I'm not saying, I don't want to say that their stories were played out, but it just like, can we see it from just a different perspective? And I think that the perspective of environmental studies is also very interesting.
Yeah.
And important to tell.
I agree with you. I think there is so much about one of the challenges for me going back this year. I'm trying to look more like a 10-ish. See how people are surviving then. When they're working for farmers, how they get a living going. But there's still not much of a lot of research that still has to be done about 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, which is why I focused on that straight out of school while I did school as well. And so Yeah, anything, you know, if you do something on that area, but there's just not, yeah, there's just not a lot on that area.
So when I was working for a law firm in Palo Alto, California, they finished a huge deal for the Indian tribes that had casinos, and they bought every single business around the world that was like 50 diamond. So they must have had hundreds, they must have had billions of dollars, multi-million dollar deal. If Indians have that much in the casinos and they're making that much money, is anyone or is the Indian tribes trying to buy land back or?
Yeah.
Back, something like that, and say this is ours and we want it now to be considered a reservation? Is anybody doing anything like that?
Yeah, some stuff I've read, I don't have anything specific on the top of my head, because I kind of got away from casinos. I was really looking at the casino back in 2007 and 2008. I was still doing some graduate work. I haven't wrote all of it since then very heavily. I kind of just like, I see all of it, but yeah, I have seen them do that. You do have, and then you also have some tribes that try to create other businesses as well. You know, you have tribes trying to create, you know, businesses with, you know, butchery bison, things like that. You know, recreating birds. You know, so you have all sorts of things of that nature trying to apply that. Yeah, you do. I mean, if you read any of the, I know a native studies newspaper just shut down that used to read, but that you find a lot of those things, you know, where they're trying to reinvigorate their culture, gain facts, and you know, I mean, with the Navajo Nation in particular, they're still working on cleaning up their lands. They have so much land that they want to go to, so they're still working on cleaning all great stuff. The casino stuff.
Yeah.
So the case of Cabazon in California from Republic of 87. So you started seeing some travel casinos in California in the early 80s. And then obviously some people didn't feel comfortable with that. And so Cabazon in California, you see actually basically the Supreme Court saying, well, it's probably fine. And so then Congress passes legislation that would regulate. And so really we're working still off that regulation. But yeah, back in the late 80s, started to see the heck of it. But you know, they organize the legislation based on what's happening. Like if the House is keeping money, like that has to be heavily regulated. But if you're just giving money back and forth, like poker rooms used to in California, and probably some other states, like if the House is not a main, you know, then it's not as heavily regulated. So they would like grade it out like grades. So where you really make the heaviest money is on the House bank, where you raise funds. Mm-hmm. And so that was the stuff that Congress regulated. And so you would have to get into an agreement with your state. If you're a tribe, you have to get into an agreement with your state, and then, which really was a huge infringement on tribal self-determination. Have to get into an agreement with the state, which is on the same footing as you legally. And so it was very odd the way it played out. But tribes went with it because if they could just make the agreement with the state, they were going to be pretty well. You know, and so some tribes have done very well, some haven't done very well. One of the, speaking of land, and if you're going to put a casino, you need to be on a major thoroughfare. And if you don't have access to a major thoroughfare, you better figure out how to get access. Well, if there's less land on a major thoroughfare, you know, so. Like the corridor between New York and Boston, felt really powerful. Very tiny tribes, but it became very powerful for casinos. Like the Phoenix Sun was one of those. And there was a Pequot. The Pequots reinvigorated themselves after essentially being demolished in the 60s. They reinvigorated themselves, created a casino, figured out how to profit from it. But yeah, late 80s is where it really took off. Well, I mean, it happened earlier than that, but it really took off in the late 80s, early 90s as far as casino. But that case, Cabazon v. California, was based on. It's from the Cabazon tribes from Palm Springs area, so they were ready to drive them on. That is how was that 40? 10, I-10. So from LA to across the country is I-10. And so I-10 was Palm Springs there, so the Cabazon was right around there. And they were right at the state of California. So.
This is, sorry.
I was appointed chairman of the Kansas Lottery in 1987, and I came up against very shortly thereafter against IGRA.
Yeah.
And that is what, when I think Congress learned from California, and they decided, let's make it beautiful throughout the United States.
Yeah.
Indian Gaming and Regulatory Act, which says anything that the people of Kansas are authorized to do by their legislature automatically enables Indians on their reservation to do. And I'm specifically speaking to economic and business opportunities.
Yeah.
So that's why you see Congress trying to figure out, as Dr. Nolan has pointed out, they've tried all different kinds of things to make Indians self-sufficient. And so this was another one of those efforts. White folks can operate casinos in a state, so the Indians can do that. So then Sharon and I went to the Menominee Indian Reservation to visit our pastor. That's in Wisconsin. And so I said, oh, my pastor, I'm a little bothered by this because my church kind of frowns on gambling. And he said, let's get in the car and I want to show you some things. And we drove around and he showed me public service building, clinics, all kinds of things that were paid for by the earnings of the casino that were used by the Native American population. So it's hit and miss. Congress is doing their darndest to try to make them self-sufficient. And there's this word in the dictionary, perfection. I don't know where else to find it, but in the dictionary, we work at it through Congress. It's not perfect, but it is an effort. As Dr. Nolan was pointed out, there's an ongoing effort to try to make these people self-sufficient.
Yeah, the IGRA was good for some, but not for others. All right, one more question.
This is really elemental, but those 4 tribes, did they reach out very far in western Kansas?
No, they're all northeastern Kansas. We have a couple on the Alaska border, then the other ones are in Topeka. So the Missouri Statute boxes, Oklahoma band, we're trying to exist, south, kind of between, well, like I said, Mardison area, but nothing out here. No, the tribes that ran through here were the Cheyennes and Arapahoes primarily. following, the buffalo cultures, and so those ran out in the 1870s. So, but yeah, those Missouri's, they're the Saxon foxes, actually. So now, that's not to say that they would never have gone in maybe central Kansas looking for some type of game to hunt, but as far as their actual place they live, they were pretty well in the farming quite a bit, so they kind of stayed. Well, I have to go off to the high school teaching government class there. I teach a dual credit government, college and high school credit still, even though I don't work at the high school anymore. So I thought I'd be a little bit late. Yeah, it's almost one. So thank you very much for being here.
We are giving him a few gifts to take with him.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.